The black maid quietly repaired the Mafia boss's son's toy until he realized she'd been fixing his family all along. Angela Cooper's hands shook as she knelt in the luxurious living room, trying to fix the toy that Luca Romano, the Mafia boss's young son, had left on the floor. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here. The toys, the mansion, everything about this world felt foreign to her. Angela had worked in the Romano household for months now, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. As she carefully adjusted the gears of the broken toy, she caught herself wondering if anyone noticed her presence, or if she was just part of the backdrop, an invisible servant in a world of power and wealth. She glanced up, seeing the grand staircase leading to the upper floors, the chandeliers above casting a warm glow over the marble floors. It all felt like a dream, beautiful, but so out of reach. Her hands moved instinctively, tightening a screw that had come loose on the small toy train Luca loved so much. The soft whir of the gears clicked back into place, and she felt a small sense of pride. It was a simple task, but somehow it felt significant. She wasn't just fixing a toy. She was fixing something that mattered to Luca. As she finished the last adjustment, she heard a door open behind her. She froze. It was Victor Romano, the Mafia boss. He had been in his study for hours, and Angela hadn't expected him to notice her, especially not now. He had always been distant, aloof, as if she were invisible. But today, as his gaze fell on her, there was something different in his eyes. His cold demeanor softened, just a little. He didn't speak at first, just watched her with an unreadable expression. Angela straightened, suddenly aware of her position, kneeling on the floor, holding his son's toy. It felt too personal, too intimate. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, almost gentle, but there was a command in it, a hint of authority. Angela swallowed. She felt her throat tighten, but she answered as calmly as she could. I was just fixing Luca's toy, sir. It broke, and he loves it so much." Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. He seemed to be processing something. It wasn't anger or irritation that flashed across his face, but something softer, almost understanding. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "Luca won't know, will he?" he asked, his tone surprisingly warm. Angela blinked, confused. "No, sir. I'll make sure it's perfect when he sees it again." He paused for a moment, then spoke again, this time with a hint of gratitude in his voice. "You've done more than just fix a toy, Angela. You've fixed a piece of his heart." Angela's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected that. No one ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever acknowledged her efforts in this way. Victor turned and walked away, leaving Angela kneeling in the vast, empty room. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to smile, a smile that no one saw but her. It was a small, quiet victory, but it meant more than she could express. She had done something good today. She had been seen, even if just for a fleeting moment. And for the first time since coming to the Romano mansion, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. The next morning, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air in the mansion seemed thicker, heavier, as though the entire place had shifted with Victor's quiet words. She went about her usual routine, cleaning, tidying, making sure everything was perfect, but there was a subtle difference now. She found herself glancing up at the staircase more often, wondering if Victor would appear again, wondering if he would look at her the same way. She had been in his employ for months, yet it had always been the same cold, distant interactions. She was a servant, an invisible worker in the shadows, never noticed. But today was different. Today, she felt seen. The house seemed emptier without Luca's laughter echoing through it. It was the first time in a long while that she truly noticed how quiet the mansion was when he wasn't around. She had grown so accustomed to the boy's energy, his boisterousness, and his need for attention. Without him, everything felt hollow. Angela paused in the kitchen, her hands drying the dishes as she listened to the soft hum of the mansion. That's when she heard the familiar sound of footsteps. It was Victor. He was coming down the stairs. And there was no avoiding it now. Angela's heart skipped a beat, and she stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He stopped at the entrance to the kitchen, his eyes finding hers. For a long second, they simply stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. "You're quiet this morning," Victor said, his voice softer than usual. Angela nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just thinking," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Victor's gaze softened, his expression unreadable. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms, as if contemplating something. Angela felt the weight of his attention on her. It wasn't the same as before. There was a tenderness in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen in him before. I've been meaning to ask, Victor said after a pause. How did you learn to fix toys? Angela blinked, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't something she expected him to ask. She glanced down at her hands, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It's something I've always done, she replied quietly. I used to take care of my younger siblings. When things would break, I had to learn how to fix them, or we'd go without. Her voice faltered slightly, but she pushed on. I guess it just became second nature. Victor was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if processing her words. Then, without another word, he turned and left the kitchen, his steps echoing down the hall. Angela exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected to share that piece of her past with him. It was something so personal, so vulnerable. And yet, somehow it felt right. Later that day, Luca returned from his day at school, running through the grand hallways of the mansion, his laughter filling the air. Angela smiled, watching him from the doorway. The toy she had fixed was clutched tightly in his little hands, and his face lit up as he saw her. Look, Angela. It works, he exclaimed, holding the toy up for her to see. She bent down to his level, her heart swelling at the sight of the boy's pure joy. I'm glad you like it, Luca, she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. Luca grinned and hugged her, a gesture so innocent, so full of trust. You're the best, Angela. You're my favorite. His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his affection. She had always been the invisible servant, the one who was only noticed when something needed to be cleaned or fixed. But today, she felt something different. She felt important. And as she watched Luca run off to play, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had done something for him, something that mattered. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was making a difference in this house. Later that evening, when the house had quieted down and the last remnants of sunlight had faded into the horizon, Angela sat on the small chair in her room, staring out of the window. The world outside seemed distant, far removed from the opulence of the mansion, and for the first time, she didn't mind. She had her own small corner in this vast, beautiful world, and she had made an impact on it. The sound of footsteps approaching her door snapped her back to the present. She stood quickly, heart racing, unsure of who it could be. She opened the door, and there he was. Victor. His presence filled the doorway, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. I wanted to thank you, he said quietly, his voice sincere. For what you did. For Luca. And for everything. Angela blinked, unsure of what to say. She had never heard him speak this way before. His words were a quiet acknowledgement of her worth, something she had never expected from him. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Victor looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, as if he were seeing her for the first time. You've done more than just fix a toy, Angela, he said softly. You've fixed a piece of my family. And for that, I'm grateful. Angela stood there, frozen, as the weight of his words sank in. She had never imagined that she could make such a difference. She had never imagined that someone like Victor Romano, someone so powerful, so unreachable, could see her, really see her. As she watched him walk away, she felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling of something blooming inside her that she couldn't quite name. She wasn't invisible anymore. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet for Angela's liking. She went about her routine, continuing her duties around the mansion, but a part of her was always waiting for something. She had no idea what exactly she was waiting for, but the shift in her life felt like something important was on the horizon. Victor's words kept replaying in her mind. You've fixed a piece of my family. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her presence in such a profound way. Even though it was subtle, even though it wasn't a grand gesture, it was enough to make her feel like maybe she was no longer just invisible in this world. Every morning, she watched Luca's excitement as he ran through the halls, his laughter ringing through the mansion. His toy was in his hands more often than not, a constant reminder of that quiet moment when she had repaired it, that brief moment of connection between them. One morning, As Angela dusted the grand hallway, Luca stopped in front of her, holding the toy up to her face. "Angela," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You fixed it so good. It works better than before." Angela smiled softly, her heart swelling at the praise. "I'm glad you like it, Luca," she replied, crouching down to meet his eyes. Luca's face lit up, his small hands grabbing hers and pulling her to her feet. "Can you fix all my toys?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. Angela chuckled, gently ruffling his hair. "I'll do my best." She watched as Luca dashed off, continuing his play, and she felt something stir within her, a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. The feeling lingered throughout the day, filling her with a quiet sense of purpose that had been absent from her life before. Later that afternoon, Victor appeared unexpectedly in the living room. Angela had been polishing the furniture when she noticed him standing by the doorway, his arms folded across his chest. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Victor broke the stillness. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his voice steady, but there was a softness to it that Angela hadn't heard before. "How did you know how to fix things?" Angela looked up at him, surprised by the question. She had never really thought much about it. "I grew up with a lot of siblings," she replied. "When things broke, we had to fix them ourselves. We didn't have the luxury of buying new things, so we made do with what we had." There was a brief pause before Victor spoke again. "I see," he said quietly. "You're resourceful." Angela smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. It wasn't often that she received compliments, especially not from someone like Victor. But there was something different about him today, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he saw her as more than just a maid. After a long moment of silence, Victor turned and began walking towards the staircase. Angela watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had said more to her in those few words than he had in all the months she'd worked here. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the start of something new. That evening, after dinner, Angela found herself once again in the living room, tidying up the space. The soft flicker of the fireplace cast long shadows across the room, adding a sense of calm to the stillness of the night. She was just about to finish when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the other staff members, but it was Victor again. He stood in the doorway, watching her with a thoughtful expression. "Angela," he said, his tone gentle, "I've been thinking. I'm going to need someone to take care of Luca more often. I don't trust anyone else in this house with him." Angela's heart skipped a beat. Was he asking her to become more involved with Luca? "I'm happy to help," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Thank you," Victor said simply. He didn't elaborate, but there was something in his eyes that told Angela more than words ever could. It was gratitude, mixed with something deeper, a kind of understanding that hadn't been there before. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "You've done well here, Angela," he said, his voice quieter now, almost like a secret. "I'll make sure you're taken care of." Angela watched him disappear down the hallway, her mind racing with the implications of his words. She had always known that this job was more than just cleaning, but this felt different. She wasn't sure where it was leading, but for the first time since she'd arrived at the Romano mansion, she felt like she might finally have a place here. A place that mattered. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Angela found herself spending more time with Luca, helping him with his schoolwork, playing with him, and, of course, fixing his toys. He had a never-ending supply of things that needed mending, and Angela had become something of a silent guardian to him. Every time she repaired one of his toys, she felt a deeper connection to the boy, and, by extension, to Victor. She began to see him in a new light, not just as the cold, distant Mafia boss, but as a father who cared deeply for his son. One evening, after Luca had gone to bed, Angela sat down in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea. She was exhausted but content. She had done more than just clean and repair things. She had helped fix a family. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. And maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she belonged. Angela stood at the kitchen window, her gaze drifting out into the garden. The mansion was silent, save for the soft hum of the night. It had been weeks since she had first started to feel like she was more than just an invisible figure in the Romano household. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. You've done well here, Angela. For the first time, she felt seen, valued, and even appreciated. The weight of that acknowledgement settled deep within her, and it was both comforting and overwhelming. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become part of something larger. As days passed, her connection with Luca deepened. The boy was full of energy, his laughter contagious, and he seemed to brighten the entire mansion with his presence. She spent hours with him, playing games, reading to him, and even helping him with schoolwork. It wasn't the work that mattered most. It was the trust Luca had begun to place in her. Every day, she felt more at home in this house, a house that had once felt so foreign and intimidating. Angela had grown used to her small room in the staff quarters, but now it didn't feel as lonely. She had become an essential part of Luca's life, and that was enough to fill her heart in ways she hadn't expected. It was a rainy afternoon when Victor approached her again. He had been absent for the past few days, caught up in business matters she didn't fully understand. But today, he appeared in the living room, watching her with a quiet intensity. Angela paused in her task, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked at him. His usual cold demeanor was softened, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "Angela," he began, his voice calm, but with an underlying urgency. "I need your help with something." Angela's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time he had asked for her help directly, and the thought sent a ripple of unease through her. "What is it, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Victor glanced around, as if ensuring no one else was within earshot, before stepping closer. "Luca," he said, his voice softening at the mention of his son. "He's been struggling with something. I've tried to talk to him, but he doesn't open up to me. I think he needs someone he trusts." Angela felt a shift in the air. She wasn't sure what Victor was asking, but it was clear that this wasn't just about the day-to-day tasks. This was something personal. "I understand, sir," Angela replied, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you need me to do?" Victor hesitated for a moment, as if considering how to explain. "I need you to spend more time with him. Talk to him. See if you can get him to open up. He's been quiet lately, distant even." Angela nodded, her heart swelling at the responsibility. "Of course. I'll do what I can." She wasn't sure what Victor was expecting from her, but she knew one thing for certain. Luca trusted her. He had always trusted her. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who cared for him, someone who wanted to help him. The following day saw Angela taking on a more active role in Luca's life. She spent more time with him, talking about things that mattered to him, his favorite toys, his dreams, the things that made him laugh. Slowly but surely, Luca began to open up to her. One evening, after dinner, Luca approached her, his small face serious. "Angela," he said, his voice quiet. "Can you help me with something?" Angela turned to him, her heart skipping. "Of course, Luca. What do you need?" He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'm scared. I don't want my dad to be angry at me. But sometimes, I feel like I don't know how to make him happy." The words hit Angela like a punch to the stomach. She knelt down to his level, her heart aching for the boy. "Luca," she said softly, "you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to make anyone happy. Your dad, he loves you just the way you are." Luca's eyes welled up with tears, and Angela gently wiped them away. "It's okay to be scared, Luca. It's okay to feel unsure. But you are never alone." The boy's sobs grew softer, and for the first time in weeks, Angela felt like she was truly connecting with him. It wasn't just about fixing his toys or playing games. It was about being there for him when he needed it the most. Later that evening, as Angela tucked Luca into bed, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was her purpose. This was why she had come to the Romano household. She wasn't just there to clean or cook or fix toys. She was there to make a difference in Luca's life. She wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, Victor called for her again, this time with a more serious expression. "Angela," he began, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "I wanted to thank you for what you've done for Luca. He's been more himself lately. I can see the change in him." Angela felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied humbly, though inside, she felt a rush of pride. Victor's gaze softened as he looked at her. "It's more than that. You've done more than just help him open up. You've given him something I couldn't. You've given him peace." Angela didn't know how to respond. She had never expected such a compliment from Victor, someone so accustomed to power and control. But in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. This was the family she had quietly been fixing. She had made a difference in their lives, Luca's, and even Victor's. And for the first time, Angela felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The weeks passed, and the changes in Luca became more evident. The once withdrawn boy was now more open, his laughter filling the halls of the mansion. Angela had become not just his caretaker, but his confidant. Every day, she spent hours with him, talking, playing, and listening. It wasn't just about fixing toys anymore. She was fixing pieces of his heart that had been broken by the cold distance of his father. As Angela continued to bond with Luca, she noticed a change in Victor as well. He had started spending more time at home, his gaze softer whenever he looked at his son. It was subtle, but Angela could see the shift. Victor was becoming more present in his family's life, no longer just the distant mafia boss who ruled with an iron fist. One afternoon, as the sun cast a warm golden light through the windows, Victor entered the living room, his expression thoughtful. Angela was sitting on the couch, helping Luca with his homework, when Victor's presence interrupted their peaceful moment. He cleared his throat, and both Angela and Luca looked up. "Angela," he began, his tone more serious than usual, "I need to talk to you about something." Angela nodded, her heart quickening in her chest. She had grown used to the quiet exchanges with Victor, but there was something about his demeanor today that made her nervous. "What is it, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Victor hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "You've been doing more than just taking care of Luca," he said, his voice quieter now. "You've helped him find a peace that I couldn't give him. I've seen the change in him, and I know it's because of you." Angela was taken aback by his words. She had always done her best for Luca, but hearing Victor acknowledge her role in his son's growth felt surreal. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, but she tried to keep her composure. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she said softly. Victor walked further into the room, his gaze never leaving her. "It's more than that," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You've become part of this family, Angela. You've given Luca something I couldn't. You've given him trust, something I've struggled to do." Angela felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of his words was more than she had expected. She had never imagined that her presence, her simple actions, could make such a difference. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly, "but I'm glad I could help." Victor nodded, as if accepting her humility. "I know you didn't," he said. "But sometimes, people come into our lives when we need them the most, whether we realize it or not. You've been that person for Luca, and for that, I'm grateful." Angela's heart raced as she looked into his eyes, seeing a depth of emotion that was rare for him. She had always seen him as the powerful mafia boss, a man who controlled everything around him with cold precision. But now, in this moment, she saw the father beneath the surface. She saw the man who wanted to do right by his son, but had no idea how to. For the first time, Angela saw the vulnerability in Victor that he had hidden so well. After a long silence, Victor turned his attention to Luca, who had been quietly watching them. "Luca," Victor said, his voice softening even more, "how are you feeling?" Luca looked up from his homework, his face lighting up with a smile. "I'm okay, Dad," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm happy. I like spending time with Angela. She's the best." Victor smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at his son. "I'm glad, Luca," he said, kneeling down beside him. "I'm glad you found someone who cares about you." Angela watched the exchange between father and son, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected to see this side of Victor. The man who had been so distant, so focused on his empire, was now showing a tenderness she hadn't thought possible. It was a quiet moment, but it was a moment that meant more than words could express. That evening, as Angela sat alone in the staff quarters, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since she first came to the Romano mansion. When she had arrived, she had been nothing more than a servant, invisible and unnoticed. But now, she had become an integral part of the Romano family. She had fixed Luca's toys, but more importantly, she had helped fix his broken spirit. She had become someone who mattered, someone who had made a difference. Angela didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. She had found a purpose in this place, a purpose that went beyond cleaning, beyond fixing things. She had found a family, even if it was an unexpected one. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had come to the Romano mansion as a maid, but now she was something more. It had been a few weeks since the quiet exchange in the living room, and life at the Romano mansion had settled into a new rhythm. Angela continued to help Luca with his studies and play games with him, but something had shifted between her and Victor. She had become a part of the family in ways she had never expected, and with that came a newfound responsibility. It was early morning when Victor called for her again, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. Angela, who had been busy preparing breakfast, wiped her hands on her apron before making her way to the study. She knocked gently before entering, finding Victor sitting at his desk, a look of deep contemplation on his face. He didn't look up as she entered, but there was an air of something unspoken in the room. "Angela," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, "I need to ask you something. It's about Luca." Angela's heart skipped. "What's wrong with Luca?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Victor finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "It's not what's wrong with him. It's what's wrong with me," he said, his tone laced with regret. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as though trying to find the right words. "I've been distant. I know it. Luca, he needs me, but I haven't been there for him the way I should have." Angela felt a sudden wave of empathy wash over her. She had seen it in Victor, the way he was always present physically, but emotionally, he had been a stranger to his own family. "Victor," she said gently, "you're here now? That's what matters." He shook his head, the frustration clear in his eyes. "I should have been here for him before. I've spent so much time building my empire, I didn't realize what I was losing in the process. I was so focused on everything else, I forgot to focus on what was truly important." Angela stepped closer, her heart heavy with understanding. "You're not perfect, Victor. None of us are. But you're trying. And that's what counts." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Victor's gaze softened as he looked at her, a flicker of gratitude passing through his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said, about giving Luca trust, about being there for him. I realize now that I have to do more than just provide for him. I have to show him that I care, that I'm here, really here." Angela nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She had always known that Victor had the capacity for change, but hearing him admit it aloud was something else entirely. "I can help," she said softly. "Whatever you need." Victor gave her a small, appreciative smile. "I know you can," he replied, his voice steady. "You've done more for him than I ever could have imagined. And now, I want to do the same. I want to be the father he deserves." Over the next few days, Angela saw a change in Victor. He spent more time with Luca, engaging in activities with him, even learning how to be a father in the ways he had neglected before. It wasn't always smooth, but the effort was there, and that was enough. One evening, after dinner, Luca approached Angela, his small face filled with excitement. "Angela, guess what?" he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "Dad played with me today. He helped me build the biggest tower ever." Angela smiled, her heart swelling. "That's wonderful, Luca," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I'm so happy for you." Luca's smile widened. "He said we're going to play again tomorrow." He paused, looking up at Angela. "I think he's really trying now. And I think he likes me more." Angela knelt down to his level, her heart aching at his words. "Of course, he likes you. You're his son, Luca. He just needed to realize what matters most. And now he does." Luca hugged her tightly, his small arms wrapping around her. "Thanks, Angela. You made him see." Angela smiled, holding him close. "You made him see, Luca. You were always the reason." The next few weeks were filled with quiet, tender moments between Victor and Luca. Angela watched from the sidelines, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had helped mend a broken family, and though she had not done it alone, her presence had played a key role in bringing them back together. As for Victor, he had become more than just a father in name. He had become a father in heart. He had stopped hiding behind his power, stopped using his business as a shield, and started embracing his role as Luca's dad. One evening, as Angela was preparing to leave for the night, Victor approached her in the hallway. There was a calm in his demeanor that she hadn't seen before. "Angela," he said, his voice steady, "I just wanted to thank you again. For everything." Angela paused, looking up at him. "You've done more for me than you realize," he continued, his eyes sincere. "You helped me find something I had lost. And you helped Luca find it too." Angela felt a lump in her throat, but she smiled. I'm just glad I could help, she replied softly. Victor looked at her for a moment longer, his gaze filled with something deeper than gratitude. You've given us more than you know, he said, before turning and walking away. As Angela watched him disappear down the hall, she realized something. She had found her place in this family, not as a servant, but as someone who had brought them together. She had helped heal a broken family, and in doing so, had healed herself too. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful Angela had experienced since arriving at the Romano mansion. Victor had continued to show up for Luca, and while it wasn't always perfect, it was real. The distance that had once existed between father and son had slowly faded, replaced by something Angela hadn't expected, a deep, unspoken connection. Victor had started to spend more time with Luca, engaging in activities he had never taken the time for before. It wasn't just about playing games or fixing toys. It was about creating memories. Angela watched from the sidelines, proud of the change she had witnessed in both of them. But as much as Victor's relationship with Luca had improved, Angela couldn't help but notice that there was still something missing. Despite all the progress, she saw the weight of responsibility that still rested on Victor's shoulders. He was a man of power, used to making decisions that affected entire empires, but the complexity of family seemed to still elude him. She didn't know if he would ever find peace in balancing both worlds. One evening, after Luca had gone to bed, Angela found herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The mansion was unusually quiet, and the flickering light from the stove cast soft shadows across the room. As she worked, she felt the familiar presence of Victor behind her. He had started doing this more often, standing quietly in the doorway, observing her without saying a word. Tonight, however, something was different. He didn't just watch. He stepped into the room, his footsteps purposeful. Angela, he said, his voice low and steady. I need to talk to you. Angela stopped what she was doing and turned toward him, her heart racing. She had grown used to these quiet conversations with him, but tonight, there was something heavier in the air. Of course, Victor. What's on your mind? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering with an emotion she couldn't quite place. I've been thinking about everything. About Luca, about my role in this family, and about you. Angela's breath caught. She had never expected Victor to speak to her this way, especially not after everything that had happened. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor stepped closer, his gaze intense. You've been more than just someone who works here. You've been the one constant for Luca. I've seen him change because of you. You've given him something I couldn't, someone he can rely on, someone who understands him. And that's something I can never repay. Angela felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She hadn't realized how much Victor had been paying attention, how deeply he had seen her role in Luca's life. Victor, she said softly, I'm just doing what anyone would do. Luca is special, and I just wanted to be there for him. No, Victor said, shaking his head. You've done more than that. You've healed parts of this family that I didn't even know were broken. You've made a difference in ways I can't explain. Angela didn't know how to respond. She had never sought gratitude for what she did. It was just her nature to help. But hearing Victor's words, especially from someone like him, filled her with something unexpected. It was a validation she hadn't known she needed. I never meant to fix anything, she said softly. I just wanted to help. Victor's gaze softened, and for a moment, they both stood there, the weight of their words lingering in the quiet room. Then, without another word, Victor turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused. Thank you, Angela, he said, his voice quieter now. For everything. As he left the room, Angela stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had always felt like an outsider in this grand mansion, but now, for the first time, she felt like she belonged. Victor's acknowledgement had changed something within her, and though she didn't expect anything in return, it had meant more than she could ever put into words. The following days saw more of the same. Victor and Luca's bond growing stronger, the house filled with laughter and the warmth of family. But for Angela, something had shifted. She found herself taking more chances, stepping into new roles, not just as a caretaker, but as someone who had a voice, someone who mattered. One evening, after dinner, Luca pulled her aside. Angela, he said, his voice filled with excitement. Dad said we're going on a trip tomorrow. Just the three of us. Isn't that great? Angela smiled, her heart swelling at the thought. She had never been included in something like this before. That sounds wonderful, Luca, she said, kneeling to his level. Where are we going? Luca grinned widely. It's a surprise, but I think it'll be really fun. Angela couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. She had become part of their world, not just in the background, but as someone they wanted with them. The next day, they left the mansion for a small cabin by the lake. It was the first time Angela had seen Victor so relaxed, so different from the man who was always wrapped up in his business. The air was crisp, the trees towering above them, and for the first time, Angela felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. As they spent the day by the lake, fishing and walking along the shoreline, Angela couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had arrived at the Romano mansion as a stranger, a servant, with no expectation of anything more. But now, as she watched Luca and Victor together, laughing and enjoying the simple pleasures of life, she realized that she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for, a family. She wasn't just the help anymore. She was someone who mattered. And as the sun set over the lake, casting a golden glow over everything, Angela smiled, content in the knowledge that she had finally found her place in the world. The days spent at the cabin by the lake had become some of the most cherished moments of Angela's life. The simplicity of it all, the sound of the water lapping against the shore, the rustling of the trees in the breeze, and the laughter of Luca and Victor as they spent time together, felt like a dream. Angela had never known a life so peaceful, so full of warmth. She had never been a part of anything like this, but here, in this quiet corner of the world, she felt like she finally belonged. Each day brought with it new moments of connection between her and Victor, and her bond with Luca had only deepened. They spent their mornings fishing, their afternoons exploring the woods, and their evenings around the fire, sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. It was everything Angela had never realized she needed. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the lake, Victor and Angela sat on the porch of the cabin, watching Luca play with a ball in the yard. For the first time, there was no rush, no looming responsibilities hanging over them. It was just them, together. Victor turned to Angela, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice soft. Angela looked at him, curious but also a bit wary. "What's that?" she asked, her heart racing slightly, unsure of what this conversation would bring. "You've been here for months now," Victor began, his gaze drifting back to Luca. "And I've seen how much you've done for Luca, for me. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for all of it." Angela felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she quickly brushed it off. "You don't need to thank me," she said quietly. "I'm just doing my part." Victor turned to face her fully, his gaze steady and intense. "No, Angela," he said firmly. "You've done more than just your part. You've been there for Luca when I couldn't be. You've been the steady presence he needed, and that's something I can never repay." Angela was speechless. She had never expected this kind of gratitude from him, especially after all the months of being just a maid in the mansion. She had never thought she would have a place in his world, let alone make such a difference. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just did what anyone would do. Luca needed someone, and I was there." Victor shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "No, Angela," he repeated, his voice softer now. "You did what no one else could. You gave Luca the one thing I couldn't, someone he could trust, someone who cared for him without expecting anything in return. That's a rare thing, and I won't take it for granted." The weight of his words settled in her heart, and for the first time, Angela felt truly seen. She wasn't just a maid, a worker in the background. She was someone who had made an impact, someone who had become a part of this family. As they sat together, the air around them thick with unspoken feelings, Luca ran over to them, his face bright with excitement. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Angela," he called out. "Want to see how high I can kick this ball?" He threw the ball into the air, sending it soaring toward them. Victor chuckled and stood up, ruffling Luca's hair. "Go ahead, show us your skills," he said, a playful gleam in his eye. Angela smiled at the sight. There was a lightness to Victor now, something she hadn't seen before. It was as if the weight of his responsibilities had lifted, if only for a moment, and he could just be a father. Watching Luca run around, laughing and kicking the ball with abandon, she realized how far they had come. Not just Luca, but Victor too. Their relationship had changed. The distance between them had been bridged, slowly but surely. The walls that had once existed between them had started to crumble, and in their place, something real had emerged. As the evening wore on, they sat around the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool evening air. Luca had fallen asleep in his father's lap, his face peaceful and content. Angela watched them both, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and peace. This was the family she had helped to heal, and this was the life she had built with them. It was more than she had ever imagined, more than she ever thought she deserved. But it was hers. And as Victor looked over at her, catching her gaze, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a quiet understanding, a recognition that she had become more than just a member of the household. She had become someone who mattered. As the fire crackled softly in the background, Victor spoke again, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Angela," he began, "you've been through so much, and you've given so much to us. I want you to know that, no matter what happens, you'll always have a place here. You're part of this family now." Angela's eyes widened at his words, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined such an offer coming from him, from someone who had once seemed so untouchable, so focused on his own world. But here, in this moment, she saw a different side of him, one that was vulnerable, sincere, and truly grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "That means more than you know." As the night settled around them, the quiet serenity of the lake reflecting the stars above, Angela felt a sense of peace she had never known before. This was her life now. Not the life she had once imagined, but one that she had created, one that was full of love, trust, and family. And as she sat there, side by side with Victor and Luca, she knew that no matter what the future held, she had found exactly where she was meant to be. The days turned into weeks, and life at the cabin by the lake continued in its newfound peaceful rhythm. Victor had proven that he could change, not just for himself, but for Luca as well. He had stopped being the distant, controlling man that Angela had first met. Instead, he had become a father, a real one. The walls that once separated them had slowly but surely come down, and Angela couldn't help but smile at the sight of them together. It was a quiet evening when Victor asked her to join him for a walk by the lake. The sun had just begun to set, casting its golden light across the water. Luca was already inside, playing with his toys, leaving the two of them some time alone. As they walked along the shore, the sound of the water lapping against the rocks filled the air, the only noise in an otherwise serene landscape. Victor was unusually quiet, his hands in his pockets as he looked out across the lake. Angela glanced over at him, wondering if something was wrong. "Victor," she said gently, her voice cutting through the stillness, "is everything okay?" He turned to her, his gaze soft. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice more serious than usual, "about how much has changed, about how much you've changed things for us." Angela stopped walking, looking at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart beating a little faster. Victor let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "You've done so much for Luca. You've brought him back from a place I didn't even know he was in. But it's more than that. You've changed the way I see everything." Angela felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She had always done her best for Luca, but hearing Victor acknowledge it made everything feel more significant. "Victor, I didn't do it for any kind of reward," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did it because he needed someone, and I was here." Victor stopped walking, turning to face her fully. His gaze was intense, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice low. "You've given me something I never thought I would have again, a family. You've made me realize what truly matters." Angela felt a lump form in her throat. "Victor, she began, but he raised his hand, cutting her off gently. "No, Angela, let me finish." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the weight of his words. "Before you came into our lives, I was consumed by power, by business, by everything except what truly mattered. And now, because of you, I'm able to see what I've been missing. You've given Luca a piece of me that I couldn't give him on my own." Angela's heart swelled with emotion. She had always felt like an outsider in this world of wealth and power, but now, hearing Victor's words, she realized how much she had truly become a part of it. "I never thought I'd be the one to bring this family back together," she said quietly, almost to herself. Victor stepped closer, his voice more earnest than ever. "You have," he said firmly. "You've done more than I could ever repay." For a moment, there was silence between them. The only sounds were the soft rustling of the leaves and the gentle movement of the water. It was a peaceful moment, but it was also one of understanding, of recognition. Angela had found something she didn't even know she was looking for: a family, a purpose, a place where she belonged. "Thank you, Angela," Victor said finally, his voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Angela looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a newfound understanding. "I'm just happy I could help," she replied softly. "I've never wanted anything more than to see Luca happy, and if I've helped with that, then I'm content." They stood there for a moment, looking out over the water, both lost in their thoughts. The world around them seemed to fade away as they shared this quiet understanding. They had both changed, in ways neither of them could have anticipated. As they turned back toward the cabin, the evening air cool against their skin, Angela felt a sense of peace settle within her. It wasn't just about fixing things, or even about taking care of Luca anymore. It was about the connection they had built, the trust they had developed. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just an outsider in their world. She had become a part of their lives, in a way she had never expected. Later that evening, as they sat down to a simple dinner, Luca's laughter filled the room. Victor and Angela exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. Luca, oblivious to the deeper changes that had taken place, continued to talk excitedly about his day. But Angela saw it, saw how much Victor was truly present with his son, how much he cared. It was a quiet change, but it was the most profound one. As dinner came to a close, Luca yawned and snuggled into Victor's lap, falling asleep almost instantly. Victor looked down at him, his expression soft. "He's growing up so fast," he murmured. Angela smiled, watching them both. "He's lucky to have you." Victor looked up at her, his gaze filled with gratitude. "We're lucky to have you," he said simply. Angela felt her heart flutter at his words, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. The quiet bond that had formed between them spoke volumes, and it was all she needed. That night, as she lay in her bed, Angela reflected on everything that had brought her here. She had started as a maid, a servant in a world so far removed from her own. But now, she was part of something bigger. She had found a family, and in doing so, had found herself. She wasn't just fixing things anymore. She was building a life, one moment at a time. The days that followed their quiet evening by the lake seemed to pass in a blur of warmth and familiarity. Angela's role in the Romano household had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. No longer just the maid, no longer just the outsider, she had become a steady, reliable presence in Luca's life and, in a way, in Victor's as well. Each day she spent with them seemed to strengthen the unspoken bond that had formed between them. Victor had continued to be more present, not just physically but emotionally. It was clear that he was trying in ways that he never had before. Angela could see it in his eyes when he looked at Luca, the care and love that had been absent for so long. But she also saw something else, something that made her heart swell with a quiet sense of pride. Victor was beginning to understand the delicate balance of fatherhood, the balance between providing and being present, between power and tenderness. It was a slow journey, but Angela could see that he was on the right path. One morning, after a particularly restful night, Angela woke to the sound of birds chirping. Outside her window, the sun had barely risen, casting soft beams of light through the trees. As she stretched and began her morning routine, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. She was no longer just a caretaker. She was part of this family. She had found a place for herself that felt right. As she prepared breakfast for Luca, she glanced out the kitchen window to see Victor standing on the porch, looking out at the lake. His figure was still, his back straight, but there was something different in the way he stood. It was as if he was finally at peace with himself. It was rare that she saw him so reflective, so quiet. Usually, he was a man of action, always moving, always working. But today, he seemed to be in a moment of stillness. Angela couldn't help but wonder what was going on in his mind. Later that morning, after breakfast, Luca ran into the living room, his face lighting up as he spotted Angela. "Angela," he exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. "Dad said we're going to visit a new place today? Isn't that awesome?" Angela smiled, her heart warming at the sight of Luca's enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Luca," she said, her voice full of affection. "Where are we going?" Luca grinned widely, his eyes sparkling. "It's a surprise, but I'm sure it's going to be so much fun." As they got ready for the day, Angela couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. They had been spending so much time at the cabin, and now a new adventure awaited them. It was a simple outing, but to Angela, it felt like another step in the journey she had taken with Victor and Luca. They weren't just going through the motions anymore. They were creating memories, forming bonds that would last. The drive to their destination was peaceful, the scenery passing by in a blur of green and blue. Angela sat in the back seat with Luca, listening to his excited chatter as he told her all about the things he hoped to see. Victor drove, his focus on the road but occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to check on them. It was in these small moments, these quiet exchanges, that Angela saw the growth in Victor. He wasn't just a man of business anymore. He was a father who cared, a father who was beginning to understand the importance of connection. The day passed quickly, filled with laughter and exploration. They visited a nearby park, where Luca ran and played while Victor and Angela sat on a bench, watching him. The simple joy of the day, no meetings, no stress, no distractions, was exactly what they all needed. By the time the sun began to set, they were back in the car, heading home. Luca was fast asleep, his head resting against Angela's shoulder, his face peaceful. Victor glanced at them, a soft smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of calm in the car. "Thank you," Victor said quietly, his voice low but sincere. Angela looked up, surprised by the words. "For what?" she asked, her heart fluttering with uncertainty. "For making this happen," he said, his gaze meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "For being here, for being a part of this. You've given us more than you know." Angela's breath caught in her throat, but she smiled. "I'm just happy to be here," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. Victor nodded, his smile widening just a little. "And I'm glad you are," he said, his voice filled with an emotion she hadn't expected. "You've become more than just a part of this family. You've become the heart of it." Angela felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She didn't know how to respond. What Victor had said was more than she could have ever hoped for. She had never expected to find a place for herself in this world, but here, in this moment, with Victor and Luca, she realized that she had. They arrived back at the cabin as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, their soft light reflecting off the water. It was a peaceful end to a perfect day, and as they walked inside, Angela felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given a gift, one she had never expected, one that had changed her life in ways she couldn't fully understand. But as she looked at Victor, standing beside her, his gaze meeting hers with something deeper than just acknowledgement, she knew that whatever happened next, she had found her place. She was no longer the outsider. She was home. The days following their return to the cabin were filled with a sense of normalcy that Angela had never truly experienced. Victor's transformation was something Angela could feel more than see. He was more present, more engaged with Luca, and in the rare moments when they all gathered together, there was a warmth that filled the house. She hadn't expected any of it, but now it felt like home. One afternoon, as Angela was preparing a meal in the kitchen, Luca came running in, his usual energy contagious. "Angela, guess what?" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. "I finished reading that book you gave me. I really liked it." Angela smiled as she wiped her hands on the towel, crouching down to his level. "I'm so proud of you, Luca. That's a big accomplishment," she said, her voice warm with pride. Luca beamed, his confidence growing with each passing day. He was becoming more than the shy, reserved boy she had met months ago. "Dad said we could go on another adventure tomorrow," he added, his voice full of joy. "Just the three of us again." Angela felt a flutter in her chest. These small, simple moments were what she had come to cherish most. "That sounds amazing, Luca," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I'm sure it will be just as fun as the last one." Luca grinned and ran out of the room to tell Victor, leaving Angela standing there, her heart swelling. It was moments like this that made her realize just how far they had all come. She had started as a stranger in this grand house, unsure of her place, but now she felt a part of something real, something lasting. The following day, they set off on their new adventure, this time to a small forest preserve just outside the city. The drive was easy, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, and as they walked along the trail, Angela couldn't help but notice how much more relaxed Victor seemed. He had always been so intense, so driven, but now, with each step through the woods, he seemed to be letting go of some of the weight he had carried for so long. They spent the afternoon walking, laughing, and exploring. Luca found sticks and rocks to collect, eager to show them to Angela and Victor as they made their way through the trees. It was simple, but it was everything. After a while, they found a quiet spot by a small stream. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed down, just for them. Victor sat down on a large rock, watching Luca play by the water, while Angela stood nearby, taking in the scenery. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Not just with Luca, but with Victor too. He had gone from being a man defined by his wealth and power to someone who was rediscovering the importance of family. Angela hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined that she could become part of this world in the way she had. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Victor turned to Angela, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere. Angela looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. "For what?" she asked, her voice soft. "For everything," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "For being here. For helping Luca when I couldn't. You've done more for us than I can put into words." Angela swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected anything from Victor in return for what she had done, but his words meant more than she could have imagined. "I'm just doing what anyone would do," she said softly, though inside, she felt a deep sense of pride. "You've done more than anyone could," Victor said, his voice firm but gentle. "You've helped heal a broken family, Angela. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Angela looked away for a moment, her heart full. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change things, let alone heal a family. But here, with Victor and Luca, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had. They spent the rest of the evening in silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky above them. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt like a turning point. When they returned to the cabin, Luca fell asleep almost instantly, his small body exhausted from the day's adventure. Angela tucked him into bed, her heart swelling with love for the boy who had become like a son to her. She lingered for a moment, watching him sleep peacefully before quietly exiting the room. In the living room, Victor was sitting on the couch, a drink in his hand, his gaze distant. Angela walked over and sat beside him, unsure of what to say. For a long time, they sat in silence, the weight of the evening settling around them. Finally, Victor spoke. "Angela," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would need someone like you. But now, I can't imagine our lives without you in it." Angela turned to look at him, surprised by his words. "Victor, she began, but he interrupted her, his tone gentle. "No, I need to say this. You've become part of this family. You've become part of my life, and I don't know what I would have done without you." Angela felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected this, never expected that she would become so important to him, to Luca, and to their family. "I'm here because I care," she said softly. "I care about you both." Victor smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "And we care about you," he said, his voice full of sincerity. As they sat there together, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable, but peaceful, filled with the understanding that they had all found something important in each other. Angela had found a family, a purpose, and in return, she had given Victor and Lucas something they had been missing, a sense of connection. It was more than she had ever imagined, and as she looked at Victor, she knew this was where she was meant to be. This was her place. As the weeks passed, life at the Romano mansion seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm. There were still challenges, still moments of tension between Victor and the outside world, but within the walls of the house, things had changed. Angela had found a place in this family, one she hadn't expected, one she had never even dreamed of. She was no longer just the maid, She was part of something real, something meaningful. Her relationship with Luca had blossomed into something that felt like motherly love. She had helped him through his fears, helped him grow into the confident, joyful boy he had become. Every day, she spent hours with him, not just watching him, but nurturing him, teaching him, being there for him in ways she knew he needed. With Victor, things were different too. He had become more than just a man she worked for. He had become a friend, a partner, and, in many ways, someone she had come to depend on. He had opened up to her in ways that no one else had ever done. She saw a side of him that was soft, vulnerable, and deeply caring, things that he had never allowed anyone to see before. One evening, after dinner, Victor asked Angela to join him in the living room. Luca had gone to bed, his soft breathing filling the silence of the house. The soft glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the room. As Angela entered the room, she saw Victor sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His expression was serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Angela," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything. About us." Angela felt her pulse quicken, but she remained calm, waiting for him to continue. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though she couldn't hide the curiosity in her tone. Victor took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "When you first came here, I had no idea what I was doing. I was so focused on my business, so consumed by everything else that I didn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't realize how much I was losing in the process." Angela watched him closely, her heart aching for him. She knew how much he had given to his work, how much he had sacrificed for the empire he had built, but she also knew the price he had paid for it. "Victor," she said softly, her voice full of empathy, "we all make mistakes. You're here now. That's what matters." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, tinged with regret. "I know, but the truth is, I wasn't really here. Not for Luca, not for you. I was so lost in everything else that I didn't see the people who truly needed me. You've helped me see that, Angela. You've helped me see what really matters." Angela felt her heart swell at his words. She had never expected to hear anything like this from him. She had always known that Victor was a man of power, but hearing him speak with such vulnerability, such honesty, made her see him in a new light. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help." Victor shook his head, his gaze never wavering from hers. "You did more than help, Angela. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. You gave me perspective, a chance to be the father I always should have been. And for that, I will be forever grateful." Angela didn't know how to respond. She had never expected this kind of praise, especially not from someone like Victor. But hearing him speak so openly about his own shortcomings, his own regrets, made her realize just how far they had come. "You're not perfect, Victor," she said softly, "but neither am I. We all have our flaws. But what matters is that we try. And you're trying. That's enough." For a long moment, they sat there in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. It wasn't awkward, though. It was peaceful, comfortable, like they both understood each other in ways they never had before. Finally, Victor stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark night. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Angela," he said, his voice low. "And I'll probably make more. But I know one thing now. I won't make the mistake of letting you go. You've become more than just someone who works here. You've become part of this family." Angela's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never imagined that she would ever be this important to him, that she would be seen in this way. She had never expected to be more than a servant in this grand house. But now, it felt like she was truly a part of something bigger than herself. "Victor," she said quietly, standing up and walking over to him. "I'm here because I care. I care about Luca. I care about you. And I'm glad I could help." Victor turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've done more than help, Angela," he said softly. "You've given me something I didn't even know I needed. And for that, I will be forever grateful." Angela smiled, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite express. "I'm just happy to be here," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "And I'm happy to be here with you." Victor walked over to her, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the room, the weight of their words lingering between them. And in that moment, Angela knew that everything had changed. She had found her place in this family, and with that realization, She knew that she had finally found her home. The days that followed the quiet exchange between Angela and Victor felt like a turning point in their relationship, as if everything that had been left unsaid had finally come to the surface. Life at the Romano mansion, once filled with the coldness of distant business meetings and silent meals, had shifted into something warmer, something real. Angela had never imagined she would be a part of something like this. But here she was, living within a family that had slowly begun to accept her as their own. The connection with Luca had grown deeper over the months, and now, every moment with him was a reminder of how much he had changed since she first arrived. The shy boy who once avoided eye contact now sought her out for help with his homework, his projects, and even to share his small victories, like the book he had just finished reading or the drawing he was proud of. And it wasn't just about the day-to-day tasks anymore. It was about the love, the trust, and the bond that had formed between them. Luca had become like a son to her. But it wasn't just Luca who had changed. Victor, too, had transformed in ways Angela never expected. He was still the powerful man who ran an empire, but there was a softness in him now, a tenderness that had been hidden behind the walls he had built around himself. He no longer just observed from the sidelines. He participated, he listened, and, most importantly, he cared. Angela had always seen him as a man of strength, but now she saw him as a man of heart, a man who had learned to prioritize his family over everything else. One evening, after dinner, they all sat together in the living room, the warmth of the fire crackling in the background. Luca was asleep, curled up on the couch, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt peaceful. Victor sat beside Angela, his hand resting on the back of the chair. They hadn't said much all evening, but there was an unspoken understanding between them that was more powerful than words. "Angela," Victor said, his voice quiet, "I've been thinking a lot lately about how things have changed, about how much I've changed." Angela turned to look at him, her heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. Victor took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "When you first came here, I didn't think much of it. You were just someone who worked for us, just another face in the house. But over time, I realized how much you've done for Luca, how much you've done for me. You've been the constant presence that we both needed. You've made me see things differently." Angela felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected to hear Victor speak so openly about his feelings, especially not after everything that had happened. "I didn't do it for any reward," she said softly. "I did it because I care. I care about Luca. I care about you. I just wanted to help." Victor smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I know," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "But you've done more than just help. You've changed my life, Angela. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing. I don't think I could have done this without you." Angela swallowed, trying to keep her composure. "Victor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm just glad I could be here. I'm glad I could make a difference." For a moment, there was silence between them, the only sound being the soft crackling of the fire. Then Victor reached out and gently took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "You've done more than you know, Angela. You've become a part of our lives in a way I never expected, and I don't want to imagine what life would be like without you in it." Angela's heart fluttered at his words. She had never imagined that she would hear something like this from Victor, someone so powerful and accustomed to being in control. But here, in this moment, she saw a different side of him, the side that was vulnerable, the side that truly cared. She squeezed his hand in return, her voice soft. "I'm glad I'm here," she said. "I've never felt like this before, like I'm truly a part of something." Victor leaned back in his chair, still holding her hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed at peace. He was no longer the man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was simply a father, a partner, and a friend. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice steady. "But I do know this. I want you here with us. For as long as you'll stay." Angela smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "I'm here, Victor. I'm here for as long as you'll have me." They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation settling between them like an unspoken promise. In that moment, Angela realized that she had finally found her place. She was no longer just the maid, no longer just an outsider looking in. She was part of this family, and this was where she belonged. The days turned into weeks. and life at the mansion continued with the same peace and contentment. The bond between Victor and Luca grew stronger, and Angela remained their steady support. She had found a home, not just in the house, but in their hearts. And as she watched Victor and Luca together, laughing and sharing quiet moments, she knew that her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. This was her family now. This was where she was meant to be.